Alright, so let's actually pick up with a little bit of kind of a workshopping type activity for some of these. We'll go over a couple of them that are lacking in a couple ways, and then we'll kind of look at how we can shape them and make them be a little bit more suitable. Okay, so this goal that I have here probably doesn't seem all that bad to a lot of you. Client will organize a 2-minute narrative with 90% or greater accuracy in 2 consecutive sessions. Okay, so the question is this good or bad? You probably know the answer is probably bad in this situation, but the more important thing to ask yourself is, why is it bad? Okay, so why is this one, what's wrong with it, all right? To where you're going to find out, like my common response to a lot of these is going to be that's an immeasurable goal, all right? So the question becomes, what is immeasurable about it? It's immeasurable because that very first verb which we have on there, organize, all right? If we were to go back and look at the verbs used while writing objectives or short-term goals, you realize that organize isn't one on here, okay? So that's not, it's not a measurable goal, all right? Is my office organized? Probably not, all right? But what percent accuracy would you put on it? Okay, it becomes really, really difficult to try to do that, okay? So you have to sit there and think like, all right, so what is it about organize? Is organize a good thing or a bad thing? When we say organize is a good thing, they need to have their story that they're telling organized. So we want that spirit. We want it to be organized. Okay. Now what we say, if it's hard to measure, then there's a couple of different ways in which we can make it measurable. Right. So we don't abandon the concept of organization, but we try to find a way to measure the organization. Right? There's 2 ways which we can do it. One will be with a rubric. We'll look at that in just a little bit. The rubrics work whenever something's not necessarily just right or wrong, where you have different shades and gradations that are involved with it. Okay, and another one will be we can rewrite the goal. Right, and that's the way in which we're going to look at first. Okay, so when we think about that, we think about the spirit, we think about organization, and we have to ask ourselves, well, how are stories organized? How are narratives organized? And we know that they're organized by the utilization of story grammars. Okay, so that's what a narrative should contain. All right, so let's make our first little revision to this one and how we're going to reword it. We'll produce a 2-minute narrative which includes all 7 story grammar components with 75% accuracy in 2 consecutive sessions. Okay, so if we're saying story grammars are the structure which organizes a story, and there are 7 of them, this would be a logical next step to write a goal, all right? So is this one good or bad, all right? It's bad, okay, because it's too vague at this point in time, all right? If he misses any one of those 7 components, then you have to count it wrong. He doesn't get credit for that one, all right? The problem is in that situation, a lot of times you'll have the kid will miss the exact same component every single time, and you should be much more focused upon that one component as opposed to the entire thing, all right? This is not thinking about language production as a process, is thinking about it as an isolated event. So you're looking at the ends and not the means. We need to look at the means to where we can find very, very specific what it is that this child is not doing, which is preventing them from doing the grander scheme thing, all right? That's one thing. So essentially this one goal here is potentially 7 goals. Right? Say they're getting the setting statement wrong every single time, then they're getting parts of it right and they're getting that individual part wrong every single time. All right, another one that I'm concerned with is like, what was the original spirit of the goal, right? The original spirit was to organize, okay? So if I just include all 7 story grammar components within here, does that make it organized? Nope, because if I tell you a story and at the end I say his name was Paul and he was 13 years old, okay, like, that maybe, yeah, for artistic effect, you might be able to manipulate it, but for the most part, our children are not going to be telling stories. They're going to be having some grand reveal like that at the end of it. So that's not really getting at the focus of organization. Just throwing it all in there does not mean it's organized. Okay? That's like saying, like, all the shoes that I have are on the floor in my room. It's now organized if I throw them all into the closet, which is where they're supposed to be. No, that's better than having them on the floor in my room, right? Because they're all accounted for in there at least, but they're still not organized within there. I need to have some form of a system. And the system which is associated with story grammars is that they happen sequentially, if not logically. Okay? So we do need to add something to address the logical and the sequencing parts of it. All right? One little aside, whenever I'm having this conversation and actual in live attendance with the students, sometimes people raise their hand and they'll say, when I ask them what's wrong with this one, they would say the 75% accuracy. And they say, well, that's too low, or that's just kind of weird because we don't usually have that there, right? First of all, I want to say there's no magic formula for percent accuracy. Okay, there's a couple semi-scientific studies that are going to be associated with some more than others, but I'm not saying it's wrong because it's 75% accuracy. I'm not saying it's right because it's 75% accuracy. I'm saying I purposely chose 75% accuracy here, and it wasn't just to spark classroom discussion, nor was it to try to get a gotcha moment for the students. I chose 75% here because what's an easy way for us to get to actually come up with 75%? Like, what's one of the ways in which we can actually have that be a reasonable percent accuracy for our student to achieve? Right? They get 3 out of 4, right? Correct? 3 out of 4. Now, what's my task in this situation? My task is to tell a story. Right? I don't want them telling a whole bunch of stories. Right? So what I want you to think about here is if you write down, he will do it with 90% accuracy in 2 consecutive sessions, okay? 90% or greater, then what am I actually saying? I'm actually saying he's got to do it with 100%. Okay, because what's the only way I'm going to get 90% accuracy? Is if I administer at least 10 of these. Okay, if I only administer 9, he gets 8 out of 9, that's not 90%. If I administer any less than 10, 90% is not a possibility. Okay? If I want to say 80%, then how many do I have to administer? I have to administer at least 5. Okay? I probably don't want my kids going around telling that many stories in a single session. Okay? Not when I'm doing group therapy with 5 other kids in a room. Right? Probably not that many kids. It is in my house now. It's like 6 kids plus neighbors' kids. It's a madhouse. All right? So that one in there, like I said, there's no wrong or right to those 75% accuracy or whatever percent accuracy and number of sessions which you're putting on there. But there is reasonable. Okay? Think through it, consider it, put something that makes sense with the goal and the activity it is that you're actually doing it. A little bit more of an aside out of here. Some people like to write, I'm not going to bother with that. All right, time's of the essence. All right, here goes attempt number 3, okay? I don't know why it says by at the bottom there. It's supposed to say why. I don't know. I'll blame it on autocorrect, although my computer doesn't have it. Client will produce a setting statement as a part of a 2-minute narrative in the correct sequence with 75% accuracy or more in 2 consecutive sessions, all right? So this one's more subtle. There's actually 2 goals that are written into one in this situation, all right? So see if you can find what the 2 goals are, okay? I'm going to keep talking. You can hit pause if you want a moment to think about it. All right, 1 is that they're producing a setting statement. Okay, 2 is that the narrative is going to be 2 minutes long. Okay, what if they write or tell a 1-minute story, includes every one of the setting statement exactly as we would want it to be? All right, we have to count it incorrect, right? Because it didn't satisfy the 2-minute requirement. Okay, so when you put 2 different requirements on a singular goal, you're writing 2 different goals, right? Now, if you want it to be 2 minutes for whatever reason, I'm not saying that you necessarily should, but if you want it to be, just write another goal for a 2-minute narrative, okay? So in the same situation, which we were on the previous slide, we were talking about include all 7 story grammar components, that essentially being 7 goals. We're putting all 7, that's 7 goals, and then we add the 2-minute part of it, that's making it up to 8 goals. So this is actually 8 goals in one. We don't want to deal in the realm of partial credit when we're doing these percent accuracies. It's okay to do it if we're thinking about a rubric, but not when we're doing percent accuracy. If you're doing these partial credit things, you're going to wind up having difficulty understanding when to write a 1 or a 0 down for the child. All right, here's what we wind up with. Client will produce a setting statement as a part of a narrative in the correct sequence with 75% accuracy or greater in 2 consecutive sessions, okay? So obviously the or greater could be added in there. I'm not really all that concerned with that one. Only time I would consider it wrong is if you write 100% or greater accuracy in that situation. Yeah, that's an impossibility. Okay. Now the question becomes, how do we go back if we find out that there's lots of story grammars that the kid can't produce? On that situation, you wind up you either write 7 goals or you work on it kind of hierarchically, which is what I would recommend, to where you sit there and say, all right, what's the first thing that he needs, or what's the thing that's having the biggest impact on his storytelling ability? And so we find that goal, we target that goal, right? Or we write 2 goals, and I'm not saying you can only write 1 or 7. I'm saying you can write somewhere in the middle, but you focus on which ones are having the greatest impact on the child's ability to succeed in that actual goal. All right, next one was the rubric option. Why might we use a rubric? Because it's easier to track subtle changes, which is really, really important for RTI. Okay, we have to do progress monitoring whenever the kids are on our caseloads, because we need to understand when we need to put them back into the classroom, which can be a little bit of a challenge. Right, but also regardless of that point of it, like it helps whenever we don't know if something's necessarily right or wrong. Okay, so is my room organized? Yes or no. You might write down no, but then how am I measuring improvement on that? Right, you have to set some actual standards which say that they're moving toward this one. And when we have something like a simple little 5-point rubric where 0 is not at all, 3 is partial, and 5 is total, well, in that situation we can say they started off at a 2 on average, and then now they're at a 4. Okay, they're still not perfect. Okay, but they're still working their way toward it. Let's think about a rubric which is actually published, which works really, really well for story retell. It also works in a lot of other areas too. You don't have to necessarily only use it for that one. You can adapt it to lots of other ways. Okay, Hauptmann's rubric for story retell has 7 main aspects. It allows you to rate things as proficient, emerging, or immature. You can say 0 if they're just flat out not doing it. All right, we can use it for story production in ours. All right, in this situation, client will produce narratives that were scored as a 5 on a rubric with 75% accuracy in 2 consecutive sessions. So what we have to realize here is, like, this is establishing our accuracy criteria. Okay, so like whenever you're doing artic therapy, you're saying they'll produce something with accuracy. So they produce a sound, you make a judgment, was it correct or incorrect, and you write down a 1 or a 0 in that situation, a check or an X. Okay, in this situation, we're saying they're going to produce a narrative that's going to be organized. We don't get to write down a 1 or a 0 in that situation. So on this one, I establish this is my criteria. I say if I score it as a 5 on this rubric, then it is a 1. If I score it as a 3 or a 1 or a 0, it is a 0. Okay, so what I need to do in this one is tell 4 stories. If 3 out of 4 of them are rated as a 5, then I've met my criteria for that day. All right, does that make sense? This is just the way, this is the the metric by which we're judging correct responses. Okay, a lot of times it's easy. Like they'll name a picture. If they name it correctly, it's a 1. If they name it incorrectly, it's a 0. Okay? This doesn't work when we're telling stories and we're trying to judge the overall thing. This also doesn't work when we're thinking about pragmatics a lot of times. Client will utilize appropriate introductions. Okay? Like, there's not always a right-wrong response in that situation. All right, sometimes going, yo, perfectly fine. All right, sometimes not so much, depending on who we're talking to. Okay, we need to judge that, not necessarily in 1s and 0s a lot of times, but it was better than flipping them the bird. Okay, but wasn't quite as good as hello, sir, how do you do? All right, we need to be sensitive enough to be able to adapt to that. All right, new goal. Client will produce sentences using passive voice when given a verb with 90% or greater accuracy in 2 consecutive sessions. Okay? So let's see if we can find anything wrong with this one. All right? Once again, if you want more time to think about it, you can hit the pause button, but there's actually nothing really wrong with this one, at least from my perspective. The reason I put this up here is because it's boring. Right? Writing goals is not the time in which you try to wow me as a professor. It's not the time in which you try to wow your clients with, like, I'm going to come up with this wholly original goal, which is just going to knock your socks off. Nope, that means you're doing something that's complicated, that's going to lead to an inability for you to measure whatever it is, and also an inability for anyone else to do follow-up therapy with that kid. Write a boring, plain goal like that. that includes the simple elements of what is the client doing, what are you giving them, what's their completion criteria. Simple. Okay? All right. Here's another one. All right, client will read single words correctly with 90% accuracy in 2 consecutive sessions. Simple. Okay? There's a little problem here. Sometimes it's not just like a mechanical thing. Sometimes you need to understand the nature of what it is that you're trying to measure, right? And we're talking about how we read. We talked about 2 distinct processes to reading a word, correct? We talked about sight word reading and we talked about phonological decoding, all right? We did our testing in a way that was going to be able to differentiate between the two. We might as well do our treatment in the same way, all right? Or else we're not being specific on the strengths and weaknesses of our actual clients. Okay, so we need to talk about the ways in which we can do that, all right? Let's see. All right, so to make a little adjustment to that one, simple. We just divide this up into 2 ones. Right? We had decoding, this phonological decoding, add single word reading. If we want to decode single nonsense words correctly, that would be fine. We talk about single age-appropriate non-phonetic words, that would be fine as well. Okay, so in both those situations, I'll be all right with it. I probably wouldn't write it this specifically for the non-phonetic words, just because it's a little bit challenging to always find those words. By the same token, I'm probably not going to use a whole bunch of nonsense words either, just because it's like I've already gone over kind of the discussion on that one. Like you're just turning nonsense words into sight words, which isn't really helpful. So I would recommend that you use real words, just unknown words to the child as part of your clinical thing. But if you're writing this goal, this is how it would look. All right, so if we look back at this slide, this one was bad because it says read single words, it's not differentiating it. Does that mean this one's going to be bad as well? Because we're not differentiating in this slide either. All right, clients will read words with 98% accuracy while reading a short grade level passage in 2 consecutive sessions. Okay, so is this one bad? I'm going to say no, this one's not bad, but the answer is why is this one not bad versus the other one was bad? What's the difference between this one and this one? Right? And this one we're reading single words, and this one we're reading what? Connected text. Okay? In connected text, you're assuming that the child's going to be borrowing upon all available resources. They're going to be utilizing their semantic abilities at times. They're going to be utilizing their phonological abilities. They're going to be utilizing their sight word abilities. In that situation, you can't tease out any of those, so we're just looking at an overall ability to do this. Okay? Now, I usually don't have a goal like this solely on my my plan of care. All right. Usually, I'm going to have something that's going to focus on the micro level to go with it. All right. I'm going to have these types of goals to go along with this type of goal. I usually don't just go to the macro and start talking about connected text because of that exact reason. Like they might be using semantics, they might be using phonology, they might be using their visual abilities. So I do want to be able to, from a treatment standpoint, isolate what we're working on, and that's why I usually wouldn't have this goal as one thing. All right, one other thing that's different about this one is I was using 90% in a lot of these. I bumped it up to 98% here. Excuse me. Why is that? Any ideas? Okay, it's because a lot of connected text is filled with filler passages, all right? 98 is actually not that high whenever you start thinking about connected text. Now, it's going to depend on the baseline of your individual client. But if they're reading at, if they're currently reading at 60%, then we're probably not going to put it at 98%. But I don't want you to think that 98 is all that high, okay? So do kind of see what the child is doing, and then we can base kind of an adjustment off of that. All right, so I'm going to skip through quite a few slides. All right, so with lesson plans, we're talking about lesson plans and SOAP notes coming up here, but lesson plans, as you do them now, are pretty much an academic exercise. You're not generally going to be doing those in a school system, at least not in the format in which you're currently doing them now. I'm not saying they should go away at all. I think that's the way in which it's a teaching process for you guys. Not to mention you guys only have like at most 3 clients right now versus once you're out there you'll have 40 to 50. So in that situation you wouldn't be able to write 40 or 50 of those every week. At least it would be really, really challenging for that. But a lot of the things that you're writing up will get kind of swallowed up into the SOAP note as well. So I am kind of using SOAP notes here as our running example, but just know that it does apply to whatever format of documentation which your facility chooses to use. All right, SOAP notes, they're really, really important. All these are pretty self-explanatory, so I'll go through them pretty quick. But why do we need to track? We need to see if there's progress, which IAPs and insurance companies and the people we serve themselves definitely want to see. An important part is to be able to change or adapt. So we need to be flexible enough to adapt as like change is occurring or change is not occurring, right? So it's really common for us to teach a child a skill and they get close to criterion and then we kind of say, all right, they got this goal. All right, but the problem is we haven't necessarily assessed where their carryover into other areas. So if we wind up being able to go in and adjust that one to where all right, so let's say we have like we're working on a little y-axis, x-axis graph here, and like this is showing growth in that direction. Okay, so this is just on the y-axis you have percent accuracy, and this is just the session which we have on here. So we start and they're at a pretty low level and then they're growing. A lot of times we'll get up there to that point and we'll say, okay, well, they've met this goal. All right, now the problem is we haven't actually changed or adapted anything to see if they have it in another context. So good therapy actually looks like, I'll give myself a little bit more space here, good therapy looks like it had an initial trajectory, all right, and then once they get close to criteria, we move some of those levels of cues, we make things a little bit more challenging to them, and we oftentimes see a dip in performance, and where we would hope to see another gradual improvement that's going up there, but when the kid truly has it is when they're growing and we take away some cue or we make things more challenging for them and then they continue to grow. All right, that's when the child's actually became capable of mastering that concept. And we don't know that without actually implementing that into the SOAP note. If we write down that we were doing this but now we're doing that, and that's why we see this big dip in performance or stuff like that. All right, another thing is adapting whenever we think about, like, we're just flatlining, right? If we're once again on my imaginary little scale here, right, and we're down here low at 10 to 20% for the whole time, like in that situation, you need to be doing something different. If the child's getting 10% over and over and over again, then you're missing some underlying skill that child's not able to do. All right, obviously there's exceptions if we're thinking about advanced communicative need kids. So to where you might have to work on those low level things where you're not having a great level of success. But when we're thinking about it from a developmental language disorder standpoint, we shouldn't be seeing percent accuracies of 10, 20% for extended periods of time. We need to be, if we are, there's something you're missing along the way. All right, I'll say this plenty of times, or at least I would if I were around you guys, but like we're a really, really transient field. We switch jobs an awful lot just because of the nature of kind of who we are as a field and what we do. Some of it has to do with our work setting, some of it has to do with just any other number of socioeconomic factors, but we switch jobs an awful lot. So someone will eventually get your caseload. Or your kid may move and they get your caseload in by that token. But somewhere along the way, some other therapist is going to have to look at this client, pick up this client, and they're going to want to know what to do. And it's really, really difficult to do whenever there's a shoddy record of SOAP notes that are going on with it. Okay, so one of the ways in which you can really help out that next person is by taking very good notes and allowing them to understand what it was that you were doing. Okay, in the summer times after I was close to finishing up my dissertation, and I just worked kind of more sporadically because I needed to devote more time to that one, but I also needed money, so I did need to work at times. I would just do people's makeup visits and things like that, and it'd be pretty common. I would go in there and they would have a goal that was written. I'm not saying this is a good goal or anything like that. It's just easy for illustrative purposes. They would have a goal that was something like, client will name colors with 90% accuracy, yada, 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 yada. And I would go in there and I'd look at the previous accuracy and they were getting like 80%. So I'd go in there and they'd be doing it with me and they'd be getting like 30% or 40%. Well, if there wasn't any notes on there, I wouldn't understand why. But if there were notes, a lot of times you would find that, okay, well, previously they only had a binary choice of 2. Right? So they're essentially using Connect 4 and asking the kid, what color is this? And they would sit there and flip a coin and say red or black. And they got up to 80%. And I go in there and I got 5 colors for them to choose from. And they're struggling an awful lot more. Okay? Not saying none of these things can happen or they're wrong to happen. I'm saying, but you got to document as they are occurring. Also, legal documentation, which is actually more important than you might think of. I'm not one of those people who's going to sit there and say, you're likely to go to court one day and things like that, or you're going to get sued one day, or anything like that. I've known a lot of speech pathologists. I've never known any of them to get sued for negligent care. What I have seen quite a bit is a lot of times this stuff comes up in like child custody type cases. All right, a lot of times they're saying that parents may be fighting over who gets custody, and they're usually arguing over the level of care that the other parent's providing, and that's one of those situations where I've seen that soap notes have gotten subpoenaed on more than one occasion. All right. Also, multidisciplinary communication, so we're discussing it among other people who are often usually sharing a caseload with us, which is really, really helpful if you have some level of description be involved in there. All right, as far as what a SOAP note actually is, subjective, objective assessment plan. Subjective is really important because we kind of interpret our entire session in light of the subjective observations which we made. So if we say that he was inattentive and unwilling to cooperate, then that tells me something about the next section, which is the objective, the data which we got. Now this is what we're usually tracking progress by, what insurance companies are mostly looking at as well. A is the assessment, which is actually where we're going to spend the most course time on. It's where we'll talk about comparing and contrasting some of the outcomes, also introducing the techniques. This does not mean that it gets left blank if we did not administer a test, just because it says that word assessment in it. Okay, but we'll be talking about that an awful lot. And then finally, it's going to be the plan part, and this is kind of what you're going to do as a result of everything that you saw in this session. Okay. All right, so as we're working our way through this remember that kind of my background was in a private practice, but I contracted through the schools. So understanding the nature of schools and also understanding the nature of insurance were the two things that my background kind of provided me with. Now, whenever I'm talking about writing goals, and whenever I'm talking about SOAP notes and lesson plans and things like that, I want you to know that this is not things that I learned as part of higher education. These are things that I learned in the field that I wish I was much more prepared for whenever we got it, which is not a knock on my alma mater. It's more of a statement of what happened shortly after I graduated. I worked for about a year after I graduated, and then the state had a really, really bad budget crisis. Okay, so they started trying to recoup a whole bunch of money from their insurance, from the state-run insurance, which was Medicaid, which was the primary people which we were serving as part of the practice which I worked for. So as we were working through these are things which I learned from them on how to write better goals, how to provide better documentation. So that's what these next slides are going to kind of be working through. All right, one of the biggest treatment and documentation pitfalls was that if you were randomly addressing goals. So if you put 12 goals into the plan of care, and then you're working on goals 1, 2, 3, 4 this week, and then 7, 8, 3, and 2 the next week, and then you're just kind of jumping around sporadically hitting them, that's really not good therapy for a number of reasons. One, you're not getting any repetition out of it. Quality treatment requires repetition to a degree on it. It does require consistency. You have to realize that these are kids with a language disorder, so they're going to really be rigid to the structure in which you're providing for them, and if you're not giving them that same type of activity, then you're going to have some real challenges in them keeping up. All right, I oftentimes will make analogies between treatment and sports practice. So if I wanted to learn how to do golf, all right, and I analyzed my swing and find out that I had 15 things wrong with it, which is an underestimate because I probably got 500 things wrong with my swing. but I'm going to work on things 1, 2, and 3 today, and then tomorrow I'm going to go to the driving range and I'm not going to work on those 3 things, but I'm going to find 3 other things to work on, you're going to wind up not improving on any of those things. Okay? So that's something that you need to think about. It's also something that means you need to consider whenever you're thinking about how many things to actually put in the plan of care. We talked about inserting multiple goals into one. We did that whenever we were doing our little whiteboarding session, where we were talking about the unintentional 2-minute narrative thing, which made it become 2 goals instead of 1. Another one is a lot of times people write, client will produce he, she, and it with 90% accuracy. So the spirit of the goal, once again, okay, you want them to produce that type of pronoun with a certain accuracy, but the problem is you're actually putting 3 different goals into there. Now, a lot of schools will allow you to do this. I'm just telling you, a lot of insurance companies will not allow you to do this. So that's kind of a problem which you may encounter. Another one's a failure to report an outcome in the manner in which the goal was written. So in that situation, a lot of times when we write a criterion of like client will do something 10 times, and then we write down 90% accuracy, or we say client will do no more than 3 instances of echolalia, and then we write down 80%. Okay, there's a disconnect between those two, which is something that we need to do. All right, I didn't mention earlier because I didn't really want to go on another rant, but I don't like numerical criteria. I like percent accuracy. That's the way it goes in this class. Like if you want to say they'll do something 8 out of 10 times, why not just write 80%? Okay, you'll get the same exact result. That way, what if I say he'll do it 8 out of 10 times, and I do 8 of them, and he got them right, and I run out of stimuli, and I don't have anything else to do, but he got 8 out of 8, but he didn't get 8 out of, well, I guess 8 out of 10 he would have got. You can assume that. Well, let's say what if, but you get the point, right? If I say he must do it 9 out of 10 times, what if I get the 9 right, then I do 10 and he gets it wrong, and now try 11 just to try one more, and he got 9 out of 11 right. Okay, in that situation, you kind of have to write down goal wasn't met. Versus if I want to write down 90%, I can do as many stimuli as I want, as many trials as I want. I don't have to aim for one specific number. All right. The last one is something that you guys do an awful lot, and I'm not going to lie, it's something that probably practicing clinicians do an awful lot more than they would like to admit. But that's the failure to delete or move on from accomplished goals, and a lot of times this is a result of copy and paste. So regardless of whether or not you're doing this on a Word document and submitting it to your supervisor, or if you're doing it in some medical record software, usually you have the option to copy from a previous one and put it on there. And students and I guess clinicians alike will sit there and write goal completed, and then the next week they'll be working on it again, and the next week they'll be working on it again. They'll still just have goal completed written down there. If you completed it, move on. Right? What else it is that you may do. The number one thing which we'll be addressing as part of our assignment in this class is going to be the lacking assessment section. Now, I'm not talking about an absent assessment section, I'm talking about one that's lacking. So if you don't mention what your treatment was and you only describe the subjective, the objective, and the plan sections, you basically talk about mood, attention, data, and next steps. All you've done is collect baseline data. Okay, that's not skilled necessity. Okay, so if you're not talking about what the treatment it is that you're doing, it's not skilled necessity. The insurance company or the school system or whoever is paying your checks does not need to pay someone near as much as they pay you in order to collect baseline data. If I sit there, that's just essentially flipping over flashcards. What's this? What's this? What's this? What's this? What's this? And write down whether or not they got it right or wrong. Okay, that's not what you're here at grad school for. You're not here to determine whether or not a kid got answers right or wrong. You're here to determine to treat that child in order to enable them to get more right answers. All right, it's a big, big difference. Do not do just baseline therapy. There are some of the the internship videos which get sent back to Melissa in order to judge and to grade. And I really, really, really wish I could show these students to you guys as a class and shame them. They're sitting there doing no form of treatment whatsoever. They're just asking the child to answer something, and they're saying, mm-hmm, and they're moving to the next one and saying, good, or saying, try again, and that's not treatment. Right? You knew how to say try again before we got here. show me some form of variation in that treatment. Show me what it is that you're actually doing it. Okay? So I don't want to make it sound like there's lots of people out there doing bad therapy, therefore this is the number one pitfall. I'm actually saying there's lots and lots of people out there that are doing very good therapy, but they're not writing about it. Okay, like this is a documentation pitfall, is that you have to describe what it is that you're doing here, and that's the way in which you're doing it. So even if you're implementing the same approach over and over and over again, so even if you're using cycles approach over and over in articulation therapy, what was it that you were doing today or this week that made it unique? How are you adapting to that child responding, all right? And there's going to be some variation within that one, all right? So, like I said, the climate in which I learned this stuff was not an enjoyable one. We had to do these things called audits. Okay, so what they would do is they would go through your folders. So let's say you had 10 folders. They would say, all right, we're going to go through 10% of them. They would pull out one of your folders if you only had 10, and they would fine-tooth comb that thing. And if they found any of the difficulties, which I was talking about on this one mostly, and some of these, and they could sit there and they would claim that you were kind of doing Medicaid fraud, that you were billing for services that were not skilled, therefore 10% of your caseload has been found to be erroneous, so we'll need to get 10% of your payment back. Okay, so we paid you $100,000 last year, had a good year, all right, and not throwing that out there as a number that I used to make or a number that you will make, because I never did, that's for sure. But if that's just easy math, so 10% of $100,000, you owe us $10,000 back. And that was something that you could do. If it was severe enough, you could actually wind up with ASHA trouble, or you could even wind up with some revocation of your licensure. And if honestly any of these things are happening, the audit wasn't your fault. Okay, they randomly chose you to be audited. But if any of the other three were happening, then a lot of times you were going to lose your job anyway. All right, so let's focus on the assessment and the plan sections of the SOAP note. All right, we're going to do a running example here. Again, this is just a short-term goal, which we're going to be writing the assessment section on for our hypothetical client here. We're not focused on from a goal standpoint yet. The client will verbally produce complex sentences consisting of two clauses when given two nouns, 90% or two or greater accuracy in 2 consecutive sessions. All right? So, the A section, this is the formulaic part of it. This is what we used to have to write for every single goal. Okay, so you're going to be like, that's a lot. This is also what's going to be part of your assignment coming up. All right, the A section, the first thing we're doing is addressing which goal we're talking about. So they were specific enough in the state of North Carolina to where they were saying that you couldn't even say to address goal 1, you had to specifically lay it out. This was not rewrite the entire goal, okay? Like this was the original goal, right? I guess that was verbally produce complex sentences, blah, 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 a whole lot more. This was just enough to say it's this goal, not that one. That was all we're looking for in that situation. Okay? In step 2, we would kind of generally describe it. If we had a specific technique, we would throw that out there now. A lot of times in language, we don't necessarily have a specific technique because we're going to do a lot of play-based things. We're also doing a lot of curriculum-based things, and we don't have necessarily like a name for the activity which we're doing. Or we can describe it if we don't have that name. So in this situation, a mock classroom scenario was developed in which the child played the role of the student, the clinician played the role of the teacher. The client was required to develop a sentence using 2 nouns that were provided by the clinician. All right. Then we get into a little bit more detail regarding what we're doing with the activities and the stimuli. This would have been helpful for me whenever I was working. If their activities were playing Connect Forward, their stimuli was everything was either red or black. That would have been helpful for me as opposed to sitting there thinking that, okay, well, I'll just get out my Candyland, which has more colors than does the Connect Forward, and sitting there trying to work on naming colors with that situation. All right, now this is where treatment starts. Okay, like this part's skilled, right? This is skilled to where you're developing the procedures which you're going to do in order to elicit the things. That's definitely skilled, but this is where I want to see, this is where the rubber's meeting the road, where you need to be doing treatment. What are you doing whenever they respond? Notice that it does not say, what did you do when they responded incorrectly? Because it's not only that, all right? It's what did you do when they responded correctly? What did you do when they responded incorrectly? In both situations, that's the way in which we're making the links between this really, really weird arbitrary language thing and this behavior which they just exhibited. You just said this, that is correct because. Okay, that's the feedback which we're giving in order to try to make that connection between the child. This is not a motoric event. Okay, this is not an auditory thing which they produce a certain phoneme in a certain way and they hear it and they say that's right. This is not a sports activity where we're working on shooting free throws and they do a couple things right and they see the end result of the ball going through the hoop where they have that reward there. Okay, this is not what that is. We're talking about language, and language is right and wrong to a degree, but it's also got a lot of stuff in the middle, and we need to explain to the child why something is correct or why something is incorrect. And that's what we're doing with this part. All right? And the last part that we'll incorporate into this one is some compare and contrast. All right, that's all part of the assessment plan. We can talk about it in terms of techniques. So if we talk about last week I was using a binary choice, this week I was using a choice of 4, last week I was doing fill in the blank, this week I was doing free response, last week I was giving them a carrier phrase, this week I was not. Those types of things in terms of techniques. Stimuli, once again, the color thing, if I was using red and black checkers versus the cards to Candyland. But this is also something that can be incorporated into the child's behavior, okay? What do I mean by that one? It's not necessarily compare and contrast this session to last session, but sometimes during our S section, we can write child started off very cooperative and attentive, but as the therapy session moved on, they became very uncooperative and inattentive, right? That's where you can actually incorporate that right here, like this is the goal where the behavior started to be a thing, okay? So you can incorporate that into there, all right? When we look at the examples coming up on the next page, these are ways in which you can kind of do this in, like I said, it can be dropped in there. It doesn't have to be this add-on that we put at the end, but Johnny struggled far more with this level of cueing than he did previously when given an initial binary choice to complete the task. The stimuli for this and new vocabulary words were implemented during today's treatment session. It's possible that contributed to him doing worse, or this is the behavioral one where we start to say that his attention began to fluctuate during the activity as compared to previous sessions. Okay, so here becomes the total soap note. All right, to which you're going to be like, I'm not writing all that. Okay, well, you're going to write all that for this class. But honestly, this really didn't take all that much time. It definitely was a growing period where we had to get used to writing this type of thing. But this stuff kind of becomes really, really second nature to kind of spit it out to where you're doing it. Also, you have to realize with language, you're not working on 15 goals. You're working on like 4 or 5 goals, sometimes 2 or 3 with these individuals, especially when you're in a group setting. A lot of schools aren't going to make you write to this degree. But I always have the philosophy that if you can write it to this degree, then you can write the limited ones. I hope you go out and get a job to where you're going to do great therapy and you're going to have awesome growth with your clients, but you don't have to write a novel every single time, right? This definitely can contribute to burnout to a degree. But honestly, if this was your kid who was being taken care of, wouldn't you want this level of accountability that would be shown by it? Okay, like I openly admit, like that was something that oftentimes got pushed by the wayside. As me as a previous employer, was that communication that occurs with the parent. We don't have a ton of time. All right. Now this is a form of communication which is showing that I'm doing my job. I might not be sending this to the parent every single week, but if I wanted to have, if that parent came to me and had a meeting and said, "What have you been working on in therapy?" I could give them this, and this is really a rundown of everything that they're doing, and it would explain to the parent very well how their child is doing. Okay, so this is it's a good thing. All right, now we're on to the B section. If the child continues to struggle, next session will include the utilization of a graphic organizer in order to build up descriptive vocabulary. This is one of those situations where that child's struggling. Do not sit there and keep banging your head against the door and trying to beat that dead horse to even more death. Okay, do something else. Make an adjustment. All right. By the same token, okay, it's unacceptable I need to hear this. Like, it's really, really unacceptable, because some of you probably do it, and some of you are probably going to be tempted to do it later on. It's really, really acceptable to, in your subjective section, write something about kids' poor attention, kids' poor behavior, and never write anything about it in your P section. Okay? What are you going to do in order to make your sessions more facilitated for that individual, for that client? Okay? You have to stay within your ballpark. Like, you don't get to sit there and say, I'm going to make sure that child takes his medicine before our next session. That's not your area. Okay? Your arena is to sit there and do the best with how that child is coming into you every single day. All right? We don't get to use restraints. All right? We used to, I'm obviously not like straitjacket restraints, not what I'm referring to here. Like, we used to sit there and be allowed to put them in little chairs, okay, that would keep them still to a degree. We're not allowed to do that as much anymore, right? Maybe there are some situations which you are, but I think it's pretty frowned upon. So it's like, what is it that you're going to do about your room that's going to make it less conducive to this child maintaining his attention? What is it that you're going to do about your activity that's going to make it more engaging for the child? All right, those are the things which you need to bring up here as part of your plan. All right, the last part, we're looking at intervention with the language for learning kids. So we're thinking about this with school-age kids, kindergarten to 6th grade, kindergarten to 5th grade type of things. From this one, you're going to backtrack a little bit. From this one, you're going to realize that, like, we're not going to be sitting here and saying, oh, all right, this child exhibits that pattern, we should use X technique with the individual, okay? What we're going to instead do is actually focus on a lot of principles that make sense, and if you're doing these principles, there's only 3 of them, not lots. If you're doing these principles, then you're generally going to be on the right path in order to improve this child's performance in the academic setting. Okay, so that's what we're kind of aiming for here. The first principle, which we'll associate with it, is going to be use curriculum-based instruction. And our assessment tools do not do this. So for those of you who like to administer a test and say, I'm going to grab some goals out of the test, and it says, oh, they're supposed to be doing this. Let me write that down. How you work on that? I don't know. We'll see how the test worked on it. All right, let's do it like that. All right, in that situation, you wind up doing things similar to the self, where you say, point to the big brown dog that's followed by a white dog before you point to the triangle in the second row. Okay? I promise you, there's nothing academic about that. There's nothing that's keeping that child from performing on in their teacher's thing on those specific stimuli. Okay? Is that revealing something about their language abilities? Yes, it is. Okay? We're looking at the sequencing part of that. We're looking at inclusion, exclusion. We're looking at some of the semantic concepts of it. We're looking at a whole lot of important things in there. But we need to take those types of things and make them turn into an academic task to where we'll wind up having some carryover between that one. Right? And that's one of the reasons we have a big focus on narratives, because schools have a big focus on narratives. So if they're having difficulty with sequencing, where that's showing up academically is oftentimes in a narrative, either the production or the comprehension of it. All right? So the goals also should be focused kind of on what the child should be learning as part of the classroom. You can think about that really easily from a semantics standpoint. All right, just look at like their science notebook, see what their next section's going to be on, borrow some of that vocabulary, and then you got something to work on. That way, whenever the child hears it in class, they're going to have it very automatically stored to where they can access that lexical entry and say, yep, that's the thing which I'm working on. Right? That's the thing which we worked on in treatment. I know what it is. I don't have to sit there and think about it that much. Okay? So you can think about that 2 different ways. Stimuli, which we just talked about. You can have academic related stimuli, which is a really good idea. I'm not saying you should do it exclusively, okay? If you have a deck of flashcards to work on semantics, yes, that's fine, but incorporate the academic type things as well. But then you can also do it from a setting or classrooms activity type thing, and you can work on activities which are commonly utilized as part of the classroom. All right, we'll skip that slide. We're just going to move on to the second principle, which is to integrate oral and written language. Okay? Now, I didn't make these up, so if you're saying that I like to always jump on the written bandwagon, I didn't make it up. Okay, I'm just delivering the mail in this situation. So what you can do with this one is you're providing both oral and written opportunities. It doesn't mean you're doing the same thing twice. Okay, so if you have an oral goal, then you're not going to have a written goal. No, it doesn't mean that one. What you're doing is you're incorporating the two modalities. So you're basically just doing print saturation in this situation, bombardment with print. So use lots of books. If you're using flashcards, incorporate the written word underneath it. If you're using I'm trying to think of, well, let's just stick with flashcards in that situation. So you have the flashcard, but you're doing it, you don't want them to read it because you want them to be able to name it, right? That's perfectly fine. So I'm not saying you have to go find flashcards with the word written on it. But what I'm saying is after you use that flashcard, after you name that object, after you describe that object, after you use it in a sentence, or do whatever it is that you're doing with that object, then you write down the spelling of that word. That makes a better link for it. It gives them another source of information whenever they're accessing that within their lexicon, all right? So when we talked about dog being stored in the lexicon, and you have the robust representation of that one, so we understand its semantic components, we understand its definitional components, its syntactical components, but we also understand its visual components and its orthographic components, so the way in which it's spelled. That way, if it gets varied, I have a new I have a new unit in there to where if it's not DOG, but it is DAWG, I now have a new association to go with that. Okay, and that's a good thing for comprehension. A lot of the people I know in town and from other cities as well, they have like a glass tabletop on their big table that they're doing their therapy at. That's great because the glass tabletop's also known as a dry erase board, right? You write that word out on there. If you have a whiteboard, then write it out there. If you have a smart board, write it out on there. It gives you a chance. And also if you're doing it on your tabletop, there's one kid who can be the eraser kid for the day, and that's something that they like to do. It's kind of like being the line leader type thing. Right? We have that word, we can sit there, we can now focus on it from a phonological awareness part. We can clap out its syllables. If we're working on it from a phonemic awareness part, we can work out, take away this phoneme and replace it with that phoneme type thing. Lots of things in which you can do in order to try to bridge it between that reading thing, which is going to be so important as they get on up there in years. All right, moving on to the third principle. Just call this one go meta. We've hit on this quite a bit, but meta skills include talking about, thus thinking about thinking, and this is what I was talking about being so important when we're thinking about the forming of bonds between a language behavior and an actual expressive or comprehensive behavior. So where we don't have that external reward that's inherent, intrinsically built in it. We need that discussion which is going to occur as part of your treatment in order to form that link. Okay, so we need to have this client, we need to have our child direct their consciousness toward the language and the cognitive skills that the child needs. And there's a couple of ways in which we can do this. It's the implementation, so as we're arriving at the right answer, okay? Which means we're oftentimes wading through some incorrect answers. As we're arriving at the correct answer, we're talking about this answer was incorrect because, right? The why that's going to be on there. This answer is getting closer because, all right? And then we get the why. This answer is correct because, all right? That's a really, really important part. And hopefully we're going to be able to teach them to teach themselves. That's the hope for all this. Now, how do we do this? With a whole lot of discussion, a whole lot of feedback. We have to use simplified language initially because these are kids with a language disorder, but we actually need to start preparing them for more complex language usage. We have to understand parts of speech. We have to understand that one in order to have the common vocabulary, which one's going to be used in their curriculum, but two, in order to be precise about what it is that we're talking about. Okay, so you may talk about things or objects in the beginning, but you're going to have to work your way to nouns. You may talk about action verbs in the beginning, but you're going to have to get to word verbs. Okay, you'll have to talk about the syntax of the different syntactical forms which you're talking about. Okay, because when you're thinking about why did we use that form of the verb here in this sentence, okay, we have to say because it was a past tense verb. All right? We can't say because I did it yesterday. All right, we're eventually going to have to understand the academic language that's associated with it. Not to mention what pragmatics, which we haven't really addressed much up to this point in time when we're thinking about it. But the why is outrageously important in that situation. Like I said, you can sit there and there are going to be times where just saying yo is a perfectly appropriate greeting, okay? And there are going to be times when it's a perfectly inappropriate greeting. We need to be able to tell our client why. Why is it not okay to say that right now? Okay? Why can you not do that in this setting, but you can do it in that setting? Right? Because otherwise we're going to sit there and we're just going to train them to be little lions jumping through hoops whenever they hear the sound of a whip. All right? They don't understand and can't actually apply it to their own situations. Okay? We don't use this type of speech when we're with the principal because the principal is a person of authority. Okay? Who are some other people of authority? So now they know whenever they do get in trouble, they're not speaking to a police officer like that. They're not speaking to a judge like that. They're not speaking to someone who is in a supervisor or boss like that. Okay? So that's really, really important. All right, so here on this slide, we have a lot of things on here. I don't really have a means of highlighting on this situation, but let's go through and we're going to see where our principles are actually represented in here, right? First principle was curriculum-based. So I said there was two ways in which we could do that one. We can make it be associated with the actual activity which is occurring, right? Or we can make it be associated with the stimuli. So in this one, when we have it, the child played the role of the student and the clinician played the role of the teacher. That's making it curriculum-based. Okay, what we also have here is we have these now, where is it? All right, so right here, I'm not going to be able to get to it. My hand disappears. But to coincide with class unit on music. Okay, so that's making it curriculum-based. Now, I'm not saying that you have to go out and know what a first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade thing is doing on here. I'm not saying you have to go out and find a word list that's going to be associated with their specific grade level. I'm saying if they're studying this in class, you work on it here. You're not tutoring them, okay? You're providing them the capability to understand it in their classroom. All right, so that would be the first principle, those two situations right there, where we have the activity and we also have the stimuli. Principle 2, where we're incorporating written and oral words verbally stated. Okay, so the nouns were verbally stated to the client, and they're also given a picture, and that was in addition to reading the short passage. Okay, so we have lots of ways in which written and oral is being implemented in there. The third principle where we're going meta. Okay, all right, on this one, we're talking about the verbal feedback as to why, here's the end of it, as to why the response was correct. That would be going meta. We also have down here at the end where we talk about the clinician modeled the appropriate response and discuss with the client why the modeled response is considered correct. Okay? All right, please don't just sit there and you say, what's this? Nope. What's this? Nope. It's this. Okay, let's move to the next one. Like, let's try to sit there and make some form of a link out of that one. Say, this one's called this, and maybe you can rely on some morphology, and there's an actual root as the meaning to why it's named and said that one. Maybe there's something that's associated with its habitat where you can bring into that one. We can say, yeah, this is an animal that flies. What else can we say about this thing like that? And we try to make links to that thing to where they can sit there and, if do nothing else, try to semantically associate this object which you're giving them, not with an individual picture, all right, but with a whole slew of descriptors that are going to be associated with it. All right, the book has principle 4, which was really, really redundant. It said, like, collaborate to prevent school failure by participating in RTI, incorporating principles 1 through 3, and I don't know why you need a principle 4 which told you to do principle 1 through 3, okay? So, all right, so now here's your actual lesson plan or SOAP notice. I will be sending out an email that will be associated with this at some point in time. All right, so this is posted online as well. But you're going to write 3 short-term goals for a hypothetical 7-year-old boy with developmental language disorder. 1 for expressive syntax, phonological awareness, verb tense agreement. So that's part of like the rubrics available online. I'm not positive if I have it embedded in the PowerPoint coming up. We'll see it in just a moment. But your rubric's going to require you to write some of these, whether or not they're correct or, kind of losing it. It's like 2 straight hours of lecturing, if not more. So like you're going to have to be judged based upon like whether they're measurable, and also going to be judged on whether or not they're appropriate. So if it's a goal for phonological awareness, it needs to actually focus on phonological awareness, that type of thing. So you write the short-term goals for that one, and then you write just the assessment section of that one. You're going to assume that the child made some errors on that one, all right? So we're going to work out something which I'm not really ready to reveal yet. In the past, this has usually been a thing where I can check over your goals to make sure that you're along the right path for that one. I'm not going to be able to check out all these over email, but I will work out something to where we'll be able to do something to where I'll provide guidance on the writing of the goals. All right, for the A section part of this one, you don't have to complete the comparison and contrast section. I'm not asking you to make up anything in this situation, so you don't need to say that he got 20% last week and he got 30% this week. I don't care about the actual data or the behaviors. I'm basically just wanting you to say, if the client struggled with this level, I would do this. If they struggle with that, I would do this. Once they got it right, I would do this. And just basically walk me through step by step what your treatment is, what your error strategies are, what your reward strategies are. Those are the types of things which I'm doing, in addition to how it is that you're setting up the task for the individual. You definitely need to go beyond repeating and modeling. A lot of students turn this in where they say, if they were unsuccessful, I would repeat the items to them. If they were still unsuccessful, I would model a correct response, okay? You didn't need grad school to do that, okay? What's this? No. Try again. What's this? No, it's a PowerPoint clicker, okay? What's this? All right, an empty wallet. All right, so I do have the rubric on here. The measurability of the goal is going to be, this rubric's going to be wrong because we're adding some points to this one. So I'm not going to go over it right now. And I'm not sure it's going to be as simple as doubling because I don't remember exactly what I changed the point total to for this one, okay? So this is going to increase. I actually think it might be as simple as doubling because I think it went from a 50-point assignment to a 100-point assignment, but I'll make sure I get that updated. All right, this is one thing that comes up about every semester. This is not a group assignment. Okay, maybe this will be less likely with you guys working at a distance, but there shouldn't be any similarities in the goals or the activities which you're writing for. I'm not even going to incorporate the long-term goal aspect of this one, so just don't even bother with that. Like, just mark that off your thing. If you aren't doing this independently of your groups, you're going to receive a 0 for this assignment. I'll tell you, every single time someone's done plagiarism on this situation, and they wind up getting a 0 on this one, it's wound up making them either get a B or a C in the class versus if they would have done a really bad job on it. Like used to be a 50-point assignment. Like if they would have got 15 out of 50 points on it, they would have gotten that higher grade. Okay, like this is not worth doing it with a group. Okay, do it by yourself. All right, so that's where I'm actually going to leave off for this one. I got one more little section of lecture to record, and that one will be posted as well.